The Yorkshire moors in 1976 were experiencing a heat wave that cracked the earth and bleached the grass to a pale gold. It was during this unnatural drought that young couple Mark and Sarah Thompson found the advertisement in the local paper. Mill House, North Yorkshire. Historic property, secluded location, price negotiable for quick sale. The price was suspiciously low, even for 1976. When they asked the estate agent, a nervous man named Mr. Higgins, he simply muttered about the owners wanting a quick sale and changed the subject. The house stood at the end of a winding lane surrounded by skeletal trees that seemed to bow away from it as if repelled by some unseen force. The old mill wheel was frozen in place, choked with decades of ivy and neglect. "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, her artist's eyes already seeing the potential. So much character. Mark, a practical school teacher, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "It feels heavy," he remarked. But Sarah's enthusiasm swept his concerns aside. They moved in on a Saturday, their little Volkswagen Beetle packed with boxes. The previous owners had left in a hurry. Half-empty cups still sat on the kitchen counter. A child's toy truck lay abandoned in the hallway. And in the master bedroom, a large wooden cross hung upside down above the bed. "That's odd," Mark said, reaching to correct it. "Don't!" A voice seemed to whisper in his mind. He spun around. "Did you say something, Sarah?" She was downstairs unpacking kitchenware. That first night, the temperature in the house dropped suddenly. Their breath misted in the July air. Sarah woke to the sound of the mill wheel turning, its groans echoing through the silent house. When she shook Mark awake, the sound stopped instantly. The next morning, Sarah discovered her sketchbook open to a page she didn't remember drawing. A detailed portrait of a gaunt-faced man with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. At the bottom, in handwriting that wasn't hers, were the words, "Welcome home." Meanwhile, in the village pub 2 miles away, old man Henderson sipped his bitter and told the new school teacher, "That mill house? Bad business there in 47. Family murdered each other. Father said the devil made them do it." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale beer and secrets. They never could find the youngest daughter's body, just vanished. Back at Mill House, Mark was cleaning out the attic when he found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a collection of childhood drawings, all depicting the same gaunt-faced man from Sarah's sketchbook. The most disturbing showed the man standing over a child's bed with the caption, "The shadow man doesn't like it when we're bad." As dust settled over the Yorkshire moors, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. Behind her reflection in the glass, something moved in the darkened hallway. A tall, thin shadow that paused, then slowly turned its head toward her. The temperature plummeted. The cross above their bed flipped upside down again. And from the old mill outside came the distinct sound of the wheel beginning to turn, dragging something heavy and wet through the stagnant water below. The morning after the mysterious incidents, Sarah decided to explore the local village while Mark remained at Mill House to investigate the property further. The Yorkshire village of Hawksworth was picture perfect, with stone cottages and a quaint pub, but Sarah noticed how villagers averted their eyes when she mentioned where she lived. At the village library, she found Mrs. Higgins, the elderly librarian who'd lived in Hawksworth her entire life. When Sarah mentioned Mill House, the old woman's hands trembled as she sorted books. "That place," Mrs. Higgins whispered, glancing around the empty library. "There's been talk for generations. Strange occurrences every 20 years or so. The mill wheel turns by itself. Children report seeing a thin man in the windows." She showed Sarah old newspaper clippings in the archives. 1901, unexplained illness at Mill House. Family relocates. 1922, Mill House. Temporarily vacated after disturbances. 1946. Local children report. Shadow figure near Mill Pond. The pattern was unmistakable. Something happened at Mill House in regular cycles. Meanwhile, back at the house, Mark discovered a hidden panel in the study behind an old bookshelf. Inside were journals dating back to the 19th century, all written by previous residents. The most recent one, from 1956, contained an entry that made his blood run cold. The phenomenon returns every generation. It begins with shadows moving where they shouldn't. Then the dreams start. It seems to particularly attach itself to creative individuals, artists, writers, musicians. Sarah, with her painting, would be especially vulnerable. Mark realized the journal was talking about his Sarah 40 years before they'd even bought the house. That evening, they compared notes over dinner. "There's something about this place that affects people with artistic sensitivity," Sarah said, pushing her food around her plate. The previous owners, the wife was a musician, the ones before that were writers. As darkness fell, they decided to conduct an experiment. Sarah set up her easel in the living room while Mark watched from the doorway. Almost immediately, her hand began moving without her control, sketching rapidly. "What are you drawing?" Mark asked nervously. "I don't know," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "It's not me doing this." The pencil flew across the paper, creating an intricate drawing of the mill pond with dozens of small, pale faces just beneath the surface. At the water's edge stood the gaunt-faced man, but now he was reaching toward the house rather than the water. Suddenly, all the electrical appliances in the house switched on simultaneously. The radio tuned itself to static, and through the white noise they could hear children whispering, "He's coming inside! He wants the lady artist." Mark grabbed the journal from the hidden compartment. Flipping through it frantically, he found a passage that made his blood run cold. The entity feeds on creative energy. It uses artists as conduits to strengthen its connection to our world. Once it is fully bonded with a creative host, it can manifest physically. Sarah's sketching became more frantic. She was now drawing the interior of their house, with the shadow man standing in this very room, his hand reaching toward her shoulder. As if on cue, the temperature dropped sharply. Behind Sarah, the shadow began to form, first as a wisp of darkness, then gradually solidifying into the tall, gaunt figure from her drawings. Mark grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her away from the easel. "We need to get out of here now!" But the front door was locked, though neither of them had touched it. Through the window, they saw the mill wheel beginning to turn, churning up dark water that looked too thick, too viscous to be normal pond water. The shadow figure took another step toward them, and for the first time, it spoke aloud. The voice was like grinding stones and breaking glass. "The artist will complete the bridge. Then I will walk in your world again." "Shh," Sarah screamed as the entity's cold presence filled the room. Mark did the only thing he could think of. He began reciting the Lord's Prayer from memory, his voice shaking but determined. The shadow man hesitated, flickering like a disturbed flame. "Old words have no power here," it rasped, but its advance slowed. In that moment of hesitation, Mark remembered something from the journal. "So it hates light. All the incidents happen at night or in dark places." He grabbed a lamp and threw it against the wall, causing sparks to fly. The shadow man recoiled, its form becoming less substantial. "Run!" Mark yelled, pulling Sarah toward the kitchen where there was a back door. As they fled the house, they could hear the entity's roar of frustration echoing through the old mill. They didn't stop running until they reached the village, where they banged on Father Alistair's door, breathless and terrified. The priest took one look at their pale, frightened faces and knew exactly what had happened. "Mill house?" he asked quietly. When they nodded, he sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this. Come inside. We have much to discuss and little time." The bonding process has already begun. Father Alistair's cottage was a sanctuary of old books and candlelight, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of Mill House. The elderly priest listened gravely as Mark and Sarah recounted their experiences, his face growing increasingly concerned with each detail. "This is worse than I feared," he said finally, stroking the cross around his neck. "The entity has chosen Sarah as its anchor. Her artistic talent makes her the perfect conduit." He opened an ancient leather-bound tome on his desk. "What you're facing isn't a ghost in the traditional sense. It's an elemental darkness that has attached itself to that land for centuries. The mill water, the stone walls, the very earth, all have been contaminated." Sarah trembled. "What does it want with me?" "The same thing it wanted with all the artists before you," Father Alistair explained. "It uses creative energy to build a bridge between its world and ours. Once that bridge is complete, it can manifest fully in our reality." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "We have to stop it." "We will," the priest assured them. "But we need to understand what we're facing. The entity feeds on fear and creative energy. The more Sarah fears it, the stronger it becomes. The more she creates under its influence, the more solid its presence grows." He showed them records from the church archives, accounts of similar occurrences at Mill House dating back to 1743. Each time, the pattern was the same. An artist would move in, experience paranormal activity, create disturbing works, and then disappear. The house would stand empty for years until new, unsuspecting residents arrive. "We need to break the cycle," Father Alistair said. "But to do that, we need to confront it on its own ground." Sarah looked at the priest's collection of religious artifacts. "Can you perform an exorcism?" "Not alone," he admitted, "and not without proper preparation. We need to weaken it first." Meanwhile, back at Mill House, the entity was not idle. The Shadow Man stood at the window of Sarah's studio watching the road to the village. Its form was more substantial now, details becoming clearer. The frayed edges of its coat, the long, thin fingers that tapped impatiently against the glass. It turned to Sarah's unfinished paintings, and with a wave of its hand, the images began to change. The peaceful Yorkshire landscapes twisted into nightmare scenes of darkness and despair. In each painting, the Shadow Man's figure grew more prominent, more real. Back in the village, Father Alistair prepared a special holy water, blessing it with prayers that had been passed down through generations of Yorkshire priests. He gathered candles, a silver crucifix that had been in his family for centuries, and a Bible that had survived the Reformation. "We must act tonight," he told Mark and Sarah. "The bonding process accelerates under the full moon, and tonight is the harvest moon." As dusk fell, the three of them returned to Mill House. The property seemed to bristle with awareness of their approach. The mill wheel began turning slowly, though there was no wind, no water in the pond. "Remember," Father Alistair instructed, "it will try to separate us. It will use your fears against you. Stay together. Stay strong in your faith." They entered the house, and immediately the temperature dropped. Doors slammed throughout the building, and from upstairs came the sound of Sarah's easel being thrown across the room. "You should not have returned." The voice echoed through the house, now stronger, more resonant. Father Alistair began the opening prayers, his voice steady despite the growing darkness around them. The candles flickered, their flames stretching unnaturally tall before nearly guttering out. Sarah gasped as she saw her paintings lining the hallway. All of them now featured the Shadow Man in the foreground, his eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. In the most recent one, he was stepping out of the canvas, 1 foot already in their world. Mark held Sarah's hand tightly. "We are stronger together. Don't let it get into your head." But the entity had been preparing for this moment. It focused its energy on Sarah, showing her visions of what would happen if it succeeded. Not just her own fate, but all the future artists it would prey on, all the lives it would ruin. "Join me," it whispered directly into her mind. "Together we can create beautiful nightmares." Sarah stumbled, clutching her head. "It's so loud. I can't—" Father Alistair stepped between them and the growing darkness. "In the name of all that is holy, I command you to leave this place." The Shadow Man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Holy? There is no holy here. Only art and shadows." The walls began to bleed darkness, tendrils of shadow reaching for Sarah. Mark swung a candle, and where the blessed flame touched the darkness, it recoiled with a hiss. "We need to get to the heart of it," Father Alistair yelled over the howling wind that had sprung up inside the house. "The mill pond, that's where it's anchored." But as they turned to leave, the front door sealed shut, covered in the same black substance that was spreading across the walls. They were trapped inside with an entity that grew stronger with every passing moment. The Shadow Man took another step forward, now fully three-dimensional, its presence filling the room with oppressive dread. The exorcism had begun, but they were losing. The cottage of Father Alistair, nestled at the edge of the village, felt like a world away from the oppressive atmosphere of Mill House. The elderly priest ushered Mark and Sarah inside, his face etched with concern as he listened to their frantic account. "This is more serious than I imagined," Father Alistair said, his hands trembling slightly as he lit a candle. "The entity has chosen Sarah. Her creative energy is the perfect fuel for its manifestation." He opened an ancient leather-bound journal. "This has been passed down through generations of priests in Yorkshire. The entity at Mill House is not a ghost. It is something far older, something that preys on artists and creators." Sarah's voice shook. "Why me? What does it want?" "It seeks to use your talent as a bridge between its world and ours," the priest explained. "Each painting you create under its influence strengthens its hold on our reality." Mark interjected, "We have to stop it. Can you perform an exorcism?" Father Alistair sighed heavily. "An exorcism alone may not be enough. The entity is tied to the land, to the very stones of Mill House. We must weaken it first." He gathered sacred items, a vial of holy water, a silver crucifix, and a Bible that had been in his family for centuries. "We must return to Mill House, but we must be prepared for a battle unlike any you can imagine." As they drove back, the sky darkened unnaturally. The moor seemed to hold its breath, the usual sounds of wildlife absent. When Mill House came into view, the air grew cold, and the mill wheel began to turn slowly, though there was no wind. "You have returned," a voice echoed from the house, deeper and more resonant than before. They entered cautiously. The interior had changed. Sarah's paintings now covered the walls, each one depicting the Shadow Man in increasing detail. In the largest painting, he appeared to be stepping out of the canvas. Father Alistair began to pray, his voice steady. The candles flickered wildly. "Your words have no power here," the voice boomed. The Shadow Man materialized at the top of the stairs, more solid than ever. His eyes glowed with a faint red light, and the temperature plummeted. "Stay behind me," Father Alistair commanded, holding up the crucifix. But the entity was prepared. It focused its energy on Sarah, showing her visions of what would happen if it succeeded. Centuries of darkness, countless lives ruined. "Join me," it whispered directly into her mind. "Together, we will create masterpieces of fear." "Oh," Sarah cried out, clutching her head. "I can't, it's too strong." Mark grabbed her hand. "Fight it, Sarah! Remember who you are!" Father Alistair stepped forward, sprinkling holy water. Where the drops landed, the shadow recoiled, hissing. "We need to find its anchor!" the priest yelled. "Something in this house is tethering it to our world." As if in response, the front door slammed shut. sealing them inside. The walls began to bleed darkness, tendrils of shadow creeping toward them. The Shadow Man descended the stairs, now fully tangible. "The artist will be mine," it declared. "Her feed will my existence for centuries to come." Father Alistair met its gaze unflinchingly. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this place." The entity laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "God has forgotten this place. Only I remain." The final battle had begun, and the fate of Mill House and Sarah's soul hung in the balance. The Shadow Man stood before them, fully manifested. The air crackled with dark energy, and the very walls of Mill House seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Father Alistair stood firm, crucifix raised, while Mark shielded Sarah from the advancing darkness. "The artist is mine!" the entity thundered, its voice shaking the foundations of the old house. But in that moment of absolute terror, Sarah remembered something Father Alistair had said earlier. It feeds on fear and creative energy. She realized they had been fighting it wrong all along. "Wait!" she cried out, stepping from behind Mark. "You want my art? Then have it!" She grabbed a piece of charcoal from her abandoned art supplies and dropped to her knees, beginning to sketch furiously on the wooden floor. But she wasn't drawing what the entity wanted. She was drawing memories of light and love. First, she sketched the sun rising over the Yorkshire moors. Then she drew children laughing in a field. With each stroke, the darkness recoiled. "No, create what I command!" But Sarah continued, her artistic energy now flowing with purpose and hope rather than fear. She drew Father Alistair's kind face, Mark's protective stance, the village church bathed in morning light. The Shadow Man screamed in frustration as its form began to flicker. "You defy me?" "I'm not defying you," Sarah said, her voice steady now. "I'm remembering what's real." Father Alistair understood immediately. He began praying again, but this time his words were of hope and redemption rather than confrontation. The holy water in his hand began to glow with a soft, golden light. Mark joined in, reciting prayers from his childhood, his voice growing stronger with each word. The entity thrashed wildly, its form becoming less substantial. "I have existed for centuries. I will not be defeated by hope." But it was too late. Sarah's drawings now covered the floor in a spiral of light and memory. With a final, determined stroke, she drew a single candle flame, the same flame that now burned in Father Alistair's eyes. The Shadow Man let out one last piercing shriek before dissolving into motes of light that were absorbed into Sarah's drawings. The darkness lifted instantly, and morning light streamed through the windows of Mill House for the first time in living memory. The three stood in silence, breathing heavily. The house felt different. Lighter, cleaner, as if a weight had been lifted that had pressed down for generations. Father Alistair placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You didn't fight darkness with darkness," he said softly. "You fought it with light. That's something it could never understand." In the days that followed, strange things happened in Hawksworth. Flowers bloomed out of season around Mill House. The mill pond, which had been stagnant for decades, now ran clear and fresh. Most remarkably, several elderly villagers reported the best sleep they'd had in years. Mark and Sarah decided to keep Mill House, but with a new purpose. They turned it into an artist's retreat, dedicated to creating works of hope and beauty. The only rule was that no art of fear or darkness could be created within its walls. Years later, visitors to Mill House would sometimes report feeling an unusual sense of peace when they entered. Old-timers in the village would just smile and say, "That's Sarah's light still shining." And on certain clear nights, when the moon was full over the Yorkshire moors, the mill wheel would turn slowly, not with dark purpose, but with the gentle, peaceful rhythm of water finally flowing free. 5 years had passed since the night the darkness left Mill House. The old stone building stood transformed, its windows now filled with the warm glow of creativity rather than the cold presence of fear. What was once a place of terror had become the Mill House Artist Retreat, a sanctuary for creators from across Yorkshire and beyond. Sarah stood in her sunlit studio, looking out at the mill pond where clear water now rippled gently in the morning light. Her latest painting depicted children playing by the water's edge, a scene that would have been impossible to capture in the old days. "Another school group is coming today," Mark said, entering the studio and wrapping his arms around her. "The local children never get tired of hearing the story." Sarah smiled. "As long as they focus on the hope, not the horror." Downstairs, the retreat buzzed with activity. Artists worked in spaces that had once been rooms of terror. The master bedroom, where the inverted cross had hung, now hosted writing workshops. The attic, once filled with disturbing children's drawings, had become a meditation space. At the village school, Father Alistair, now retired but still active, told the children a carefully edited version of the story. He spoke of courage overcoming fear, of light defeating darkness, but left out the more terrifying details. "Mill House teaches us an important lesson," he would say, "that even the darkest places can be filled with light again." Meanwhile, in the retreat's archives, a young historian named Emma was cataloging the house's history. She found Sarah's original drawings from 1976, including the frantic sketches she'd made during the entity's influence. "These are remarkable," Emma told Sarah. "They've been requested for an exhibition on Yorkshire folklore at the county museum." Sarah hesitated. "As long as they're displayed with the proper context, as warnings about what happens when we feed fear rather than hope." The exhibition became a surprise success. Visitors flocked to see the Mill House collection, and Sarah found herself giving talks about how art can be both a weapon against darkness and a tool for healing. One evening, an elderly woman approached her after a talk. "I lived near Mill House as a child in the 1950s, she whispered. "We used to dare each other to look at the windows. We always felt like something was watching us from there. Thank you for setting it free." As the years passed, Mill House became known not for its dark past, but for the beautiful art created within its walls. Musicians composed symphonies in rooms where whispers once echoed. Poets wrote verses of hope where nightmares once festered. Painters captured Yorkshire's beauty where shadows once lurked. On the 30th anniversary of the Exorcism, the village held a festival of light at Mill House. Dozens of artists who had worked at the retreat returned to celebrate. As lanterns floated on the mill pond and music filled the air, Sarah realized the entity had been wrong about one thing. Art wasn't just a bridge for darkness to cross. It was also a weapon against it, and a light that could guide others home. The mill wheel turned steadily in the background, its rhythm no longer ominous but comforting. A reminder that even the deepest darkness can be overcome, and that sometimes the most powerful exorcism isn't about driving something out, but about filling the empty space with something better. 15 years after the light returned to Mill House, a new mystery began to unfold, one that suggested their battle with the darkness might not have been as final as they believed. It began with the water. The mill pond, which had run clear and pure since the exorcism, suddenly turned dark one autumn morning. Sarah noticed it first when she went to sketch the sunrise. The water had taken on a familiar, viscous quality, and the air carried the faint scent of copper and decay she remembered from her nightmares. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling as she woke him. "It's back." But when they investigated, the water cleared as suddenly as it had darkened. Father Alistair, now in his 80s but still sharp, examined the pond and found nothing amiss. "Sometimes old memories play tricks on us," he reassured them. "The mind has its own shadows." Yet the incidents continued. Artists at the retreat reported hearing children whispering near the mill pond at dusk. Some claim to see small, pale faces reflected in the water before they vanished. A visiting photographer captured an image that showed shadowy figures standing where no one had been. The final warning came when young Liam, Emma's son who often played near the mill, fell into a trance-like state one afternoon. When he awoke, he spoke in a voice that wasn't his own. "The light only made us stronger in the deep places. We've been waiting in the stones, in the water, in the spaces between. The artist's light showed us how to return." Sarah realized with horror that their victory had been incomplete. By using her creative energy to fight the darkness, she had inadvertently taught it how to survive in the light. The entity hadn't been destroyed, it had evolved. Gathering in Millhouse's main hall, now filled with artworks created over 15 years of peace, Sarah, Mark, Father Alistair, and Emma faced a terrible truth. Sometimes light doesn't destroy darkness. Sometimes it just gives darkness new places to hide. And now, whatever they had fought all those years ago had learned to wear the mask of light. The revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud. The entity hadn't been destroyed. It had learned. It had hidden in the very light they had used to fight it, waiting patiently in the stones, the water, and now, most terrifyingly, in the art itself. Sarah stood before her latest painting, one she had titled Renewal. It depicted the mill pond at dawn, the water clear, the sky bright. But now, looking closer, she saw it. The faint, shadowy suggestion of faces just beneath the water's surface, the same faces from her nightmares decades before. She had painted them without even realizing it. "The art," she whispered, her blood running cold. "It's been using the art to come back." Mark, his hair now streaked with gray, examined the painting. "We need to check the others." They spent the day in the retreat's gallery, a space once filled with works of hope and light. To their horror, they found the same subtle corruption in piece after piece. A sculptor's abstract form now had a skeletal quality unseen before. A poet's hopeful verse, when read backwards, revealed dark invitations. The entity hadn't just survived, it had turned their sanctuary into its nursery. That evening, young Liam drew a picture for Sarah. It showed the mill house, but black, thorny vines crawled up its walls, and the windows were angry, red eyes. At the bottom, in a child's clumsy handwriting, were words that chilled her. "The quiet artist is the best listener." Father Alistair, his hands frail but his spirit unbroken, understood first. "It's not just hiding," he said, his voice grave. "It's curating. It's gathering creative energy, learning from each artist, becoming more sophisticated. It's no longer just a shadow. It's becoming a concept, an idea that can be passed on through art itself." The threat was now far greater than one haunted house. If the corrupted art left Mill House, if the ideas within it spread, the entity could potentially replicate itself indefinitely. A psychic virus transmitted through creativity. Their battle was no longer for a building or even for their own souls. It was for the very soul of art itself. They had to find a way to sever the connection between the entity and the creative process, a task far more delicate than simple exorcism. They couldn't destroy the art, for that would be destroying the light they had fought so hard to protect. They had to heal it. Sarah looked at her corrupted painting of the mill pond. She picked up a brush, not to destroy, but to reclaim. She began to paint over the shadowy faces, not with pure white, but with brighter, more vibrant colors, telling a new story of the water, one of life and resilience. It was a risk. She was engaging with the entity directly through the medium it had co-opted. As her brush moved, the air in the gallery grew tense. The other artwork seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. A whisper, woven from the collective creativity of 15 years, slithered through the room. "You cannot erase us. We are in the stroke of every brush, the rhythm of every word. We are the silence between the notes, and we are hungry. The whisper hung in the gallery like a poison. Sarah's hand froze mid-brushstroke. The vibrant colors she'd been using seemed to darken on the canvas, the hopeful scene of the mill pond twisting back into the corrupted image. You feed us with every creation, the voice echoed, now coming from all around them. It wasn't just one voice anymore, but a chorus woven from every artist who had ever worked at the retreat. Your light is our palette. Your hope is our medium. Mark grabbed Sarah's arm. Stop! You're giving it what it wants! But Father Alistair stepped forward, his eyes clear with sudden understanding. No, Mark, she's on the right path. We've been thinking like soldiers, trying to defeat an enemy. But this is a sickness in the creative spirit itself. It must be healed, not fought. He turned to the corrupted artworks. It learned from our light. Now we must learn from its darkness. The old priest did something unexpected. He began to pray, not a prayer of exorcism, but one of blessing. He walked to each corrupted piece, laying his frail hands on them and speaking words of redemption and peace. The darkness cannot understand this, he explained. It knows conflict, it understands battle. But unconditional love, grace, these are weapons it cannot comprehend. Inspired, Sarah picked up her brush again. This time, she didn't paint over the darkness. Instead, she painted light around it. She gave the shadowy faces in the water companions, bright, glowing figures reaching out to them in compassion. She painted the thorny vines from Liam's drawing, now bearing beautiful, luminous flowers. One by one, the other artists joined them. The sculptor added elements of hope to his piece. The poet wrote new verses of reconciliation. They weren't erasing the darkness, they were teaching it how to live with the light. The entity screamed in frustration. This is not the battle. Fight us, fear us! But the artists kept working. Their collective creative energy now focused on integration rather than conflict. The gallery began to glow with a new kind of light, not the blinding purity of their earlier victory, but a warmer, more complex light that acknowledged shadows but refused to be dominated by them. The mill pond outside suddenly cleared, the dark water giving way to crystal clarity. The whispering stopped, the oppressive presence lifted. Sarah looked at her transformed painting. The dark faces were still there, but now they were part of a larger, more beautiful whole, a testament that even darkness could find its place without dominating the light. Father Alistair smiled, tears in his eyes. Some demons can't be cast out, he said softly. They must be made into angels. The entity was gone, not destroyed, but transformed. And Mill House stood once again as a sanctuary, but now with a deeper understanding. That true peace isn't the absence of darkness, but the wisdom to make it part of the beauty.